Well, this is off to a great start. The very first video I generated for this episode is already going into the bloopers. I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of frustration. Jesus. Sandeep Gill. Well, buddy, happy you enjoyed. This guy again.
Hi Andy, I'm Sandeep. Thanks for accepting my invitation to chat. I really appreciate it. I've been following you on Blossom for a while. I read pretty much everything you post. I've kept my portfolio pretty simple, mostly XEQT and VOO. And I like dividends. So I started reading your posts, covered calls, put spreads, income ETFs, and now I have questions.
I know. I see your name almost every day, and I've noticed that you like my posts. And as for dividends, there's nothing wrong with that. Whether you prefer growth or dividend income, it's just a different way to invest. Hey, I can see you're in Toronto. I recognize the CN Tower. I was there for BlossomCon on July 25th.
Really? I wish I had been there. I've actually been following your posts for about 3 months.
3 months?
Yes. At first, I was mostly interested in dividend investing, but then I started reading your posts more regularly. One post led to another, and before I knew it, I was reading about covered calls, put spreads, and income ETFs. I started comparing ETFs in Excel. At first, I was only tracking distributions. Then I added dividend yields. Then I started comparing historical returns. I even created separate worksheets for different categories of ETFs. Some ETFs focused on covered calls, others focused on put spreads, and some were simply designed to generate income. The more data I added, the more confused I became. I remember reading one of your posts. You mentioned that a single ETF could have more than one yield. That sentence stayed in my head, so I went back to my spreadsheet. I picked one of the income ETFs I was analyzing. It showed a 12% yield, and that's when I realized I didn't really understand what I was looking at. Was that the yield based on today's price? The price from 6 months ago? My purchase price? Or something else entirely?
That's a very common question. When people look at an ETF, they usually see one number and assume that's the yield, but that's not always the case. The first question you should ask yourself is simple. What price are you using? The current market price, the price you paid, or the price you or someone else paid years ago? I'll give you an example. You own XEQT, right?
Yes, I've been buying it regularly for years.
Okay, let's start with XEQT. What's your average cost?
Well, I saw this morning that my average cost was $33.14.
Perfect. Over the years, you've been buying XEQT regularly by adding new contributions. Because you purchase shares at different prices, your average cost is now $33.14. XEQT is currently trading at $46.15 as we're speaking. Now, let's take a look at the dividends. According to the iShares website, XEQT paid the following distributions over the past 12 months. 10 cents, $0.20536, $0.091, and most recently, $0.322 on June 25th. Because distributions are paid quarterly, and the amounts vary from one payment to another, it's difficult to calculate an exact and consistent yield, since it changes with each new distribution announcement. But let's use an average for this example. If we add 10 cents plus 20.536 cents plus 9.1 cents plus 32.2 cents, we get 71.836 cents. That means XEQT paid a total of 71.836 cents per share during that period. If we divide that amount by 4 quarterly distributions, we get an average of 17.959 cents per payment. But that's not important. The thing to remember is that if XEQT paid 71.836 cents per share, that's the number we need to use when calculating the yield. If your average cost is $33.14, then your yield on cost is 2.167%, because 71.836 cents divided by $33.14 equals 2.167%. Now, XEQT is currently trading at $46.15. So if we divide 71.836 cents by $46.15, we get 1.555%.
Same ETF, same distributions, different percentages, but my spreadsheet showed 2.79%.
Yes, I saw your 2.79%. But it's not an accurate number because that percentage assumes that XEQT pays 32 cents 4 times a year, and that's not the case. I can see the 0.32 value in your spreadsheet, and on June 25th, the distribution was actually 0.322. So you're off by 1 decimal place. But that was only the most recent distribution. Back in September 2025, the distribution was 10 cents, and on March 26th of this year, it was 9.1 cents. That's very different from 32.2 cents per share. So we can't simply assume that every quarterly distribution will be $0.322. I wouldn't really consider XEQT a dividend investment, even though it does pay distributions. It's much closer to an all-the-market-in-one ETF type of investment, a growth ETF.
Andy, I have an emergency. When you were talking, I received a notification that they need me at the main office. Can I call you back tonight around 10 p.m.? I know it's late, but...
No problem, Sandeep. See you later. Take care.
I really appreciate, man. Thank you so much. See you later.
While Sandeep takes care of his emergency, I'd like to mention something important. When you visit a website, you'll often see a dividend yield displayed next to a stock or an ETF. But that number isn't necessarily the yield investors are actually receiving. That percentage changes over time because share prices move, and distributions can increase, decrease, or remain unchanged from one announcement to the next. Most investors didn't buy their shares today. Some bought them years ago, some added shares regularly, and others reinvested every dividend they received. That's why 2 investors can own exactly the same stock, receive exactly the same dividend per share, and still end up with completely different yields. So be careful when looking at the number displayed on a website, because it may not reflect your personal situation. When Sandeep calls me back later tonight, I'll show you a real-life example, and you'll understand why Warren Buffett's dividend yield is now over 65% on Coca-Cola.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for letting me call you back.
My pleasure. We were talking about dividend yields, and I was explaining that there are at least 3 different ways to calculate your yield. There's the yield based on the average cost of your XEQT shares, whether you bought them through a lump sum investment, dollar cost averaging, or by reinvesting distributions. In simple terms, it's based on the total amount you paid to acquire your shares. Then there's the yield based on the current market price. That's the yield your neighbor would get if he bought shares for the first time today. It's also the yield you'll usually see on most financial websites. And finally, there's your real-world yield, the one that takes into account not only your total average cost, but also the actual amount of money that came directly out of your bank account. Let's keep it simple. Suppose you buy $10,000 worth of a stock at $20 per share. That means you own 500 shares. Over time, those shares grow in value and are now worth $15,000. But while you were receiving dividends of 20 cents per share, you kept reinvesting them. Without adding a single dollar from your bank account, you used those distributions to acquire an additional 100 shares. You now own 600 shares. Let's assume the stock is now trading at $25 per share. Your average cost is $21, and your 600 shares are worth $15,000. If your neighbor buys the stock today at $25 and it pays 20 cents per quarter or 80 cents per year, the dividend yield would be 3.2%. If your average cost is $21, then your total cost basis is $12,600. The original $10,000 you invested, plus the $2,600 you accumulated and reinvested over the years. In that case, your yield on cost would be 3.81%. And if you simply calculate the annual dividend of 80 cents using your original purchase price of $20 per share, you get 4%. But if you calculate the actual cash generated by your 600 shares, you're receiving $480 in annual dividends on an initial $10,000 investment. That gives you an effective real-world yield of 4.8%. In other words, for the exact same stock trading at $25 today, your neighbor would have a dividend yield of 3.2%, while your effective yield would be 4.8%, simply because you reinvested the distributions without adding a single dollar out of your own pocket. That's how Warren Buffett's yield on cost has grown to more than 65% today. In other words, he's now receiving more than half of the total amount he invested between 1988 and 1994 in dividends every single year. And that's true even if we use a simple calculation. Taking the 53-cent dividend per share, multiplying it by 4 annual distributions, and then dividing it by the closing price of $87.71 at 4 p.m. on Friday, August 14th, which gives us a dividend yield of 2.417%. That 2.417% is the yield most investors would see today, while Warren Buffett's yield is over 65%. Now let's go back to your spreadsheet. Let's use QQQI this time. I think you're ready.
You want me to calculate it myself?
Exactly. You already have all the information you need. You have the distributions. You have your cost basis. And you have today's market price.
Okay, let me think for a second. I think I see it now. The first column is the current yield. That's the number most websites display. The second column is the yield based on my average cost. And the third column is my effective yield, the one that considers the actual amount of money that came from my bank account. That's why my spreadsheet was confusing me. I was comparing different types of yields without realizing it.
And that's exactly why you can't rely on a single number.
Okay, I get it now. I understand these 3 different ways of calculating dividend yields.
You see, if your neighbor buys QQQI for the first time today, his yield will be 14.02%, while your effective yield is 15.64%, simply because you reinvested your distributions without adding any money out of your own pocket, and because the share price increased. And it also makes it much easier to calculate your total return.
Well, thanks again, Andy. I really appreciate your help. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you for spending some time with us tonight. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never underestimate an Excel spreadsheet. See you next time. Wait, you're not leaving before the bloopers, right? What? I told you to use the notebook, not turn it into a book. Wow, my neon logo above my head lights up at the same time as the notification. That wasn't intentional, but I think it's pretty funny. Hey, I can see you're in Toronto. Jesus Christ, is that a cup of coffee or a freaking steam locomotive?
Really? I wish I had been there. I've actually been following your posts for about 3 months.
3 months? So why are you showing me 5 fingers? While Sandeep takes care of his emergency, I'd like to mention something important. When you visit a website, you'll odki dood bilop bilop bloop bloop.
Cut!
What's my line? Before we wrap up, I will never contact you privately on WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, or any other messaging platform to offer investment advice. If someone uses my name, my logo, or my image to contact you privately, it's almost certainly a scam. If you'd like to ask me a question, the safest place is publicly in the comments below my videos. Please stay vigilant. I'd like to remind you that I'm not a financial advisor. Everything shared on this channel is for educational purposes only and reflects my own personal opinions. Please do your own research before making any investment decisions. If today's episode helped you better understand investing, consider subscribing. And until next time, stay safe and keep investing by educating yourself.